you ever really thought about what it takes to build something that lasts for centuries? I'm not just talking about a building, but a symbol, something that defines an entire nation. Well, today, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of one of the biggest projects in history, the construction of Solomon's Temple. And let me tell you, it was a long time coming. All right, let's start with this. Just a number, 480. Seems kind of random, right? But believe me, this number is the key. It unlocks the entire timeline and why this temple was such a massive deal. And there it is, 480 years. That's how long it was from the time the Israelites left Egypt to the moment they finally laid the foundation stone for the temple. Think about that. We're not talking about a construction project that took a few years to plan. This was the finish line of a journey that lasted nearly 5 centuries.
Building this temple was a huge turning point. It basically declared that the days of wandering around with a portable tent, the tabernacle, were over. This was them planting a flag, putting down permanent roots in the Promised Land. It was a statement to the world and to themselves that they were finally, truly home.
Now, you can't build something this epic on faith alone. You need stuff, a lot of stuff, and a lot of political smarts. Solomon knew he couldn't pull this off by himself. His kingdom just didn't have the right materials. So he had to look outward and forge a really crucial international alliance.
And the solution was a beautifully simple trade deal. You play to your strengths. Solomon's kingdom was basically the breadbasket of the region, so he traded what he had tons of, flour and oil. And in return, King Hiram of Tyre, whose kingdom was covered in those legendary forests of Lebanon, sent over the best cedar and juniper wood money could buy. It was a perfect win-win.
Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. When Hiram agrees to the deal, he says this, right? He praises the Lord, the God of Israel. Now, at first glance, you might think, wow, he's a believer. But it's a little more complicated than that.
This is a classic example of what you might call diplomatic praise. See, Hiram's kingdom, Phoenicia, was polytheistic. They had lots of gods. In that world, giving a shout-out to your ally's god was just good politics. It was a sign of respect, like a formal handshake. It didn't mean he was converting, it just meant he was a smart ruler maintaining a strong alliance.
So the materials are secured. That's a huge step. But now for the next challenge. Who is going to build this thing? Solomon needed a workforce on a scale that is just mind-boggling. We're talking about a literal army of builders. First up, he conscripted 30,000 of his own people. These were everyday Israelites drafted into this massive national service. But honestly, that was just the warm-up act.
On top of that, you needed 70,000 carriers. I mean, think about it. All that timber from Lebanon, all those giant stones, they don't move themselves. These were the guys handling the brutal logistics of getting everything to Jerusalem.
And then, the biggest group of all, 80,000 stonecutters. These men were up in the mountains, day in and day out, quarrying and shaping enormous blocks of stone for the foundation and walls. When you add it all up, you're looking at a workforce of 180,000 people. And that's not even counting all the foremen and supervisors.
So how in the world do you manage 30,000 conscripted workers without everyone getting completely burned out or, starting a revolt? Well, Solomon came up with a pretty ingenious system. He split the Israelite workforce into 3 shifts. Each group would work for 1 month up in Lebanon, then they'd get 2 full months off back home. It was a brilliant rotation that kept the labor force sustainable for the long haul.
All right, so we've got the materials, we've got the manpower. Now let's talk about the building itself. The design wasn't just some random architectural plan. Every single detail was intentional, designed to create a sacred space, a place where heaven and earth could literally meet.
The blueprint for the temple was basically an evolution of the tabernacle from their desert wandering days. It kept the same essential layout, the holy place, and then the most holy place. But Solomon's temple was built to be exactly double the size in its dimensions. It was a powerful symbol. It said, we're honoring our past, but we're also growing, becoming something more permanent and significant.
Now, here is one of the wildest, most amazing details of the whole construction. Get this. The Bible says that the entire time they were building, not a single hammer, chisel, or any iron tool was heard on the temple site. Imagine that. This massive construction project happening in near total silence. How is that even possible?
The answer is just incredible foresight and planning. Every single stone was cut and dressed, meaning shaped to its final perfect form, at the quarry, miles away. Only after they were completely finished were they brought to the Temple Mount and just quietly slotted into place. It was like assembling the world's biggest, most sacred Lego set.
And they didn't do this just because it was a neat trick. There was a really deep theological reason behind it. In that time, iron was the metal of warfare. It was used for swords, spearheads, all the tools of violence. And the idea was that you couldn't build an altar of peace, a place of reconciliation with God, using the instruments of bloodshed. The silence itself was a form of reverence.
The stone structure was breathtaking, for sure. But the details, the finishing touches, were just as important. For this, Solomon brought in a master artisan, a guy named Huram from Tyre, who was basically a rock star of bronze casting.
At the very entrance to the temple, Huram erected 2 gigantic bronze pillars. Now, these weren't structural. They didn't hold up the roof or anything. Their purpose was purely symbolic. The one on the south was named Jachin, which means he establishes, and the one on the north was Boaz, meaning in his strength. So every time you walked in, you were passing by this massive declaration in bronze. God establishes his kingdom in his strength.
And it didn't stop there. Huram also created this enormous bronze basin they called the Sea, which rested on the backs of 12 bronze oxen representing the 12 tribes of Israel. The priests used it for their purification rituals. He also made 10 smaller wheeled basins for washing the sacrifices, plus all the pots, shovels, and bowls needed to keep the temple running. Every piece was a work of art.
Okay, so this whole thing, from the deal with Hiram to the last bronze bowl, was just a monumental effort. But there's one final detail in the story that puts the whole 20-year construction period into a really new and kind of surprising perspective.
You see, the Great Temple of God, this project that was literally 480 years in the making, took 7 years to build from start to finish. But right after that, Solomon started work on his own royal palace, and that took 13 years, almost double the time.
And that contrast is there for a reason. The biblical authors are making a pretty sharp point. The message to Solomon and to everyone else seems to be this: building a glorious house for God is a wonderful thing, but it's not the main thing. The physical building, no matter how magnificent, was always meant to be second to a life of actual faith and obedience.
And really, that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. A grand temple is a good thing, but a life of obedience is better. It took an army of men and 7 years to build the temple, but building a life of integrity and faith, well, that's a whole other kind of construction project, isn't it? And you have to ask yourself, which one is actually harder to build?